In a dramatic escalation of the crisis over Ukraine, U.S. President Joe Biden says he's sending 3,000 troops to strengthen the American presence in Eastern Europe and to reassure NATO allies of America's commitment to collective defense. The Pentagon emphasizing it is not sending troops to Ukraine, but adding today's announcement is meant to deter Russian President Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. The Kremlin has already denounced the move as destructive, saying it's likely only to increase tensions.
Another day, another increase in tension over Ukraine. The U.S. is sending 2,000 soldiers to Poland and Germany, while another 1,000 move from Germany to Romania.
The current situation demands that we reinforce the deterrent and defensive posture on NATO's eastern flank. President Biden has been clear that the United States will respond to the growing threat to Europe's security and stability. Our commitment to NATO, Article 5, and collective defense remains ironclad.
The Pentagon made it clear that no U.S. soldiers will fight in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said diplomacy comes first, but no options are off the table. We only think about peace. We only think about the return of our occupied territories, and only through diplomacy. We will not give up a single piece of our land today. We will not give up our territories, no matter what the price. Despite Zelensky's reassurances, others are preparing to do battle if it comes to a fight. The Klitschko boxing brothers, one now the mayor of Kyiv, both signed up for the army.
Other leaders in the West are calling into question.
We are not weak, and any aggressor have to understand if they do it aggressive activity against Ukraine, he have to pay huge price for that. We're ready to fight.
Leaked documents, confirmed by the Pentagon, reveal the backroom diplomatic efforts to avoid war. The U.S. offered Russia access to inspect key military sites in return for a de-escalation. Russia says it has no intention to invade Ukraine. But these pictures released by Russia's defense ministry showing joint combat drills with Belarus send a clear message. Russia is not backing down.
All right, we've got team coverage of this development tonight. I want to bring in our very own Oliver Salet. He's in Washington. And Nick Connolly is covering events for us in Kyiv in Ukraine. To you both, it's good to see you. Oliver, let me start with you. Why this deployment now? I mean, has the security situation changed, or are we talking about purely symbolic moves here?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, Brent, really. The Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby, earlier said that it's a response to that Russian troop build-up that we're seeing. We saw satellite pictures earlier today showing that Russia continues to add forces to Belarus and, of course, to that border region between Russia and the Ukraine. And that's a concern, of course, for the United States, for its NATO allies as well, and that is met now with a troop build-up of the United States, but, of course, in a very much smaller scale. And therefore, yes, in part, it's also a symbolic move, given that 60,000 U.S. troops are already stationed in Europe, 100,000 Russian soldiers on the other side of the border, and 3,000 U.S. troops is really not big of a number that we're seeing here sent and deployed by the United States.
And Nick, the Pentagon spokesman today made it clear that the U.S. is not sending any additional troops to Ukraine. So what does today's announcement mean then for the situation on the ground there?
Well, I think it just shows to Ukrainians once again what the value of NATO membership is. The numbers in Ukraine for NATO membership were not particularly high before Russia annexed Crimea back in 2018, started that separatist campaign in the east. And Ukraine basically has been convinced by Vladimir Putin over the last 8 years that this is an alliance worth being in and that it makes a difference being outside the bloc. I think the Ukrainians have been happy to see US deliveries of ammunition, of weapon system, those Javelin anti-tank missiles in recent weeks from the US, also from the UK. But beyond that, the Ukrainians are now very clear that apart from weapons and cash, they're on their own, and in the short term and medium term, they'll have to stand up to Russia on their own without boots on the ground from the US or other Western allies. And all they can do at this point is hope that this passes for now, and that at some point Russia will be distracted and they will be able to join NATO or some other alliance that puts them in a more comfortable position.
And Oliver, as it stands right now, we know that 8,500 troops are on high alert in the U.S. for a possible deployment. Now we've got 3,000 that we know are going to Eastern Europe. Do we know exactly how long they're going to be stationed there?
Well, the official take is it's just a temporary deployment. Of course, we don't know for how long, because what the U.S. Eventually wants to reach is an agreement following the diplomatic effort that we've been seeing over the last weeks. But of course, that implies that Putin de-escalates, that he changes course, that he drops his maximum demands that we've heard, and that are, of course, Russia wants to ban the Ukraine from joining NATO, something that NATO won't accept. So we are really very much in a stalemate here right now, and it doesn't look like things are getting clearer as we speak. We're looking at that Russian troop build up. So it's rather likely that we are seeing the tensions getting more severe before we see any kind of de-escalation.
Oliver Sallet reporting tonight from Washington. Nick Connolly with the latest from Kyiv. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you. And we want to take this story now to Poland. I'm joined now by Radosław Fogiel. He's a member of the Polish Parliament for the governing Law and Justice Party. He joins me tonight from Warsaw. It's good to have you on the program. Let's just talk about numbers for a moment here. 1,000 troops going to Poland from the United States. Is that just a drop in the bucket for you?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. No, it's not a drop. It's extremely important from our point of view, from the point of view of our Central European allies. It shows the unity and strength of NATO. The strengthening of eastern flank in this situation is extremely important. We have diplomatic talks on one side, but on the other side, the deterrence ability of Western allies is extremely important.
The U.S. says that these troops will not be going to fight in Ukraine. But in your opinion, is this the right time to be sending troops to Eastern Europe? I mean, there is the possibility that these moves could escalate instead of stabilize or de-escalate. Do you agree?
I don't agree at all. And I would say there is no better time than right now for strengthening American presence on the ground here in Europe, because we cannot let us being taken hostage by the Russians, by Putin's propaganda and Putin's aggressive policy. We have to show our strength. We have to show our decisiveness, and we cannot, as the West, as the alliance, we cannot be backing off all the time. The NATO policy of open doors is something that all alliance members agree on. And we have to send a very clear message to the Kremlin that Ukraine's right to determine its future, to have its territory complete and free from any aggression is the key to proper relationships, the relationships between Russia and the West.
And we know, Mr. Fogiel, that Russia does not see it that way. We have the illegal annexation of Crimea as one example to prove that. I know your country shares a border with Ukraine. How big is the concern or the fear that if Russia were to invade Ukraine, that military conflict could then spill over into Poland?
We share a border not only with Ukraine, but with Russia itself as well. But most importantly, we share hundreds of years of history with Russia in its different forms. So we can talk from our experience that this imperialistic politics will be followed by Russian government till it stops, till it is stopped by a very strong Western response. We all hoped for de-escalation, but a show of strength and the ability to respond is also extremely important when it comes to the de-escalation possibilities. I still hope that this is just a power play from Vladimir Putin, and that he won't attack Ukraine. But in this case, well, I don't think Poland would be threatened directly, but our concerns, the concerns of all the Baltic states, are real, because
Yes.
It may seem very different from Paris, Berlin, or Washington perspective, but right here on this part, in this part of Europe, the Russian threat is real.
Yeah, and that's why it's very important that we hear views coming from countries such as Poland. Radoslav Fogiel, member of the Polish Parliament for the governing Law and Justice Party. Mr. Fogiel, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joining us now is Rodrich Kiesewetter. He sits in the German parliament for the opposition party, the Christian Democrats, and is a member of the Bundestag Foreign Affairs Committee. Very warm welcome to DW News, sir. Now, as you've heard, the U.S. says these troops that will be deployed this week will not be fighting in Ukraine. But in your assessment, is this the right moment to be deploying U.S. troops to Germany?
Well, I believe this is a strong symbol to the European allies. It's a moderate and deliberate step, and it should encourage European partners to stand together, and as a symbol for cohesiveness. It's less a sign towards Russia, it's a sign of solidarity to the European NATO member states, and I think this is a good sign. It's moderate, it's deliberate, it's not escalatory.
But how do you think it will be perceived by the Kremlin? I mean, the U.S. State Department has talked about the need for de-escalation. With this deployment, does it risk escalating tensions?
No, we should ask Russia why they deploy more than 100,000 troops. And by the end of February, more than 150,000 troops. About 60% of their armed land forces. This is escalatory. And it's quite clear that we Europeans are really nervous, and we see this as an escalation without any need. Russia has breached the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine has handed over more than 20 years ago its nuclear weapons, and now it loses sovereignty and territorial integrity. So we Europeans must stand together, and it's a sign of solidarity from the United States to us Europeans. It's not escalatory to Russia. We should ask Russia, why do you escalate at the Ukrainian border?
Are you worried that Germany could become a kind of a launch pad for any military activity if the security situation in Ukraine deteriorates?
Germany has a task and a mission, and we should stand together with our allies. And Germany has received security for more than 4 decades within NATO, and now we should become a security provider. So I really am grateful for this American engagement. 3 years ago with Trump, this was unimaginable. And so we see that Biden fosters the transatlantic relationship, and Germany must play a role in it.
To that end, sir, is it time that Germany steps up to the plate and does itself more to support Ukraine militarily?
Well, Germany has quite empty stockpiles regarding ammunition and other equipment. So we should reconsider a reform of our armed forces, and we should become more reliable in encouraging and supporting our eastern neighbors. And what is also at stake is to improve diplomacy. So I am really grateful for the foreign minister that she traveled to Russia and to Ukraine. And I ask Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, not only to travel to Washington, but also to Ukraine, to Kyiv, and that we become a strong European voice, which is also listened to by Putin. We Europeans need a stronger own commitment so that not Putin and Biden negotiate about the security and future of Europe. We really need to take over the US offer for a stronger European force and a European defense, and we should take care and invest more in our own security. And there's Germany really in the forefront to improve its own security.
In conclusion, sir,
is there to fulfill its commitments.
To fulfill its commitments. To that end as well, and in conclusion, my final question to you, is there anything that Germany can do to offer the Russian President Vladimir Putin, so he can climb down from this situation without losing face?
I believe it's not up to Germany to do this, it's up to Putin. But what we need is that Putin declares the exercise as ended, and he declares this escalation as an exercise. This would be helpful. On the other side, we need new negotiations about conventional and nuclear troop reductions. We need trust-building measures. We need a new system of armaments control. I believe this could be, if the crisis is overcome, I hope so, that then we start a new negotiation agreement on conventional disarmament in Europe.
Volodymyr Kyiv is a lawmaker in the German parliament for the opposition party, the Christian Democrats, and he's also a member of the Bundestag Foreign Affairs Committee. Sir, thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good evening.